Breaking news tonight. Something absolutely extraordinary just happened in the heart of Washington, D.C., that could unravel the very foundations of American governance. In the last few hours, a wave of high-level resignations has swept through the White House, with top officials abandoning their posts in a stunning display of defiance against President Donald J. Trump, who is adamantly refusing to step down amid mounting legal and political pressures. This isn't just another day in the chaotic saga of Trump's second term. This is a total collapse unfolding in real time, threatening to plunge the nation into unprecedented anarchy. The breaking event centers on a group of senior White House officials, including key cabinet members and advisors who have just submitted their resignations en masse. The target is unmistakably President Trump, triggered by his outright refusal to comply with a Supreme Court ruling handed down this morning that demands he relinquish certain executive privileges tied to ongoing investigations into election interference and classified documents mishandling from his previous campaigns. The decision to resign was made behind closed doors during an emergency late-night meeting at the White House Situation Room just minutes ago, as confirmed by multiple sources close to the administration. These aren't low-level staffers walking out. We're talking about heavy hitters, like the Chief of Staff, the National Security Advisor, and several deputy secretaries from critical departments such as Defense and Homeland Security. Their letters of resignation leaked to major news outlets almost immediately cite irreconcilable differences with the president's refusal to uphold the rule of law and express fears that continued service would make them complicit in what they describe as constitutional violations. One particularly damning letter from the acting Attorney General states, "The President's defiance not only endangers national security, but erodes the very institutions we swore to protect." This is not routine procedure or standard political conflict. This only happens when confidence in the executive branch collapses entirely, signaling a shift from mere disagreement to outright institutional breakdown. The behavior of these officials indicates a loss of patience among those who once navigated the turbulent waters of Trump's administration, now moving toward enforcement of legal boundaries rather than accommodation. Whispers from inside the Beltway suggest that this coordinated exit was planned over the past week, following failed attempts to persuade the president to reconsider his stance. Adding fuel to the fire is the unprecedented signal from within the Republican Party itself. Former allies and GOP insiders are no longer defending Trump with the vigor seen in past crises. Silence from key names like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and House Speaker Mike Johnson is deafening, with their offices issuing no-comment statements that speak volumes. Private reactions among party leaders have been described as panic-stricken, with many engaging in rapid damage control to distance themselves from the fallout. Public loyalty, once a hallmark of Trump's grip on the party, has been replaced by cautious hedging and quiet exits from joint appearances or endorsements. The political meaning is clear. They see what's coming, a potential implosion that could cost the GOP dearly in upcoming midterms and beyond. One anonymous senator told reporters off the record, "We've reached the point where survival means cutting ties, not doubling down." This betrayal marks a turning point where insiders who once benefited from Trump's populist wave are now prioritizing self-preservation over allegiance. As the night unfolds, the legal and power cascade is already in motion. This mass resignation activates enforcement mechanisms embedded in federal protocols, including possible contempt proceedings against the president for non-compliance with court orders. Outcomes now include the potential issuance of arrest warrants if Trump continues to barricade himself in the Oval Office, or even the invocation of the 25th Amendment by remaining cabinet members. Though with so many vacancies, that process is fraught with complications. Seizure of assets or freezing of executive accounts could follow if investigations escalate, leading to a constitutional showdown unlike any in US history. One move now forces the next through legal obligations and automatic triggers. The Supreme Court's ruling, upheld after an appeal denial earlier today, mandates immediate turnover of documents, and Trump's refusal has set off a chain reaction. Congress is reconvening in an emergency session tomorrow, with Democrats pushing for impeachment articles and even some Republicans signaling openness to removal processes. Behind the scenes, institutions are acting in coordination and with remarkable speed, suggesting a belief that Trump's resistance is weakening under the pressure. The strategy phase appears to be containment, isolating the president from his usual support networks, while limiting damage to broader government functions. The objective is to control the narrative, prevent any desperate escapes or power grabs, and lock positions before the situation spirals further. This escalation phase is just beginning. Expect public defiant statements from Trump himself, perhaps via a late-night X post or an impromptu press conference from the Rose Garden, railing against deep state traders and rigged courts. Emergency filings from his legal team are likely inbound, seeking stays or reversals, while counter orders to federal agencies could test the loyalty of civil servants. Global reactions are already trickling in, with allies like the UK and Canada expressing concern over US stability. The power struggle now shifts from politics to enforcement, from rhetoric to mechanism, from loyalty to survival. What started as a legal dispute has morphed into a full-blown crisis, with the Capitol buzzing with rumors of Secret Service preparations for potential unrest. As dawn breaks over Washington, the streets around the White House are eerily quiet. But the tension is palpable, like the calm before a hurricane that could reshape the political landscape forever. Protesters have begun gathering in small clusters, waving signs demanding accountability, while security barricades multiply, hinting at the fear of widespread anarchy if this standoff prolongs. Inside the executive mansion, sources say President Trump is hunkered down with a skeleton crew of die-hard loyalists, plotting his next move amid the debris of abandoned offices and unanswered phones. The betrayal deepens as more details emerge about the GOP's internal mutiny. Senate Republicans, once Trump's unyielding shield during impeachments and scandals, are fracturing visibly. Explosive reports from Capitol Hill indicate that a group of GOP insiders, including several from the Judiciary Committee, held a clandestine meeting last night to discuss contingency plans for a post-Trump era. This isn't about disloyalty. It's about saving the party from total destruction. One participant leaked to a major network. The silence from figures like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham, who have historically been vocal defenders, underscores this shift. Their social media feeds, usually ablaze with support, remain dormant, a tacit admission that the tide has turned. Private reactions among these insiders are laced with panic, as emails and texts obtained by journalists reveal frantic discussions about distancing strategies. "We can't go down with the ship," reads one message from a senior aide. Public statements, when they come, are hedged with phrases like respect for the process, rather than outright endorsements, signaling a quiet exit from the Trump orbit. The political ramifications are profound, with midterms looming in 2026. Many see this as the death nail for Trump's influence, forcing the party to pivot toward new leadership or risk electoral wipeout. This turning point amplifies the legal cascade, where each resignation peels back another layer of protection around the president. The Supreme Court's ruling, which stemmed from a marathon session ending in a 6-3 decision against Trump, activates a series of automatic triggers under federal law. Contempt proceedings are now inevitable, with the Justice Department, now led by an interim appointee loyal to institutional norms, preparing to file charges. Possible outcomes include asset seizures tied to Trump's business empire, freezing of campaign funds, or even an arrest warrant if he defies a subpoena to appear before Congress. Removal. Processes are gaining traction with House Democrats drafting articles of impeachment for obstruction of justice, while whispers of 25th Amendment discussions circulate among the remaining cabinet. One constitutional expert noted, "This is a showdown where the executive's defiance collides head-on with judicial authority, potentially forcing military or law enforcement intervention. The mechanisms are self-perpetuating. Trump's refusal obligates agencies to enforce, creating a domino effect that could culminate in his forcible removal from office." Behind the scenes, reads paint a picture of calculated coordination among institutions. The FBI and Secret Service are reportedly in heightened alert, sharing intelligence with congressional security to prevent any rogue actions. This speed and silence suggest a collective belief that Trump's resistance is crumbling, eroded by isolation from his inner circle. The strategy is multi-seated. Containment to prevent spread of chaos, isolation to cut off communication channels, and damage limiting to safeguard ongoing government operations like budget negotiations and foreign aid packages. Objectives remain clear. Control the narrative through selective leaks that portray the resignations as patriotic duty rather than betrayal. Prevent any physical or legal escape by monitoring Trump's movements and lock positions by securing affidavit from resignees that could be used in future trials. One insider described it as a surgical strike to excise the problem without collapsing the whole system. The escalation phase intensifies with every passing hour. Public defiance from Trump is imminent. Aides say he's preparing a national address, possibly bypassing traditional media to stream directly on his Truth Social platform, where he'll decry the events as a witch hunt orchestrated by radical leftists and rhinos. Emergency filings from his lawyers are already hitting the courts, appealing the ruling on grounds of executive privilege, though legal analysts predict swift denials given the conservative-leaning bench's prior stance. Counterorders could emerge with Trump attempting to direct federal employees to ignore the resignations or court mandates, testing the bureaucracy's resolve. Global reactions are pouring in. European leaders from NATO allies are issuing statements of concern, urging calm, while quietly repositioning diplomatic stances. Markets in Asia open jittery with US futures, dipping amid fears of instability. The struggle evolves from political maneuvering to raw enforcement, where words give way to actions and loyalty bows to the imperative of survival. As the day progresses, the focus sharpens on whether remaining officials will hold the line or join the exodus, potentially tipping the balance toward total anarchy on Capitol Hill. The sun has barely risen over the National Mall, yet the Capitol complex already resembles a fortress under siege. Barricades line Pennsylvania Avenue. Capitol Police in riot gear stand shoulder to shoulder at every entrance, and helicopters circle overhead in low, ominous sweeps. Inside, the marble halls, what began as quiet defections, has erupted into an explosive Senate mutiny, with Republican senators openly turning against President Trump in scenes that veteran staffers describe as the most chaotic since Watergate. The mutiny crystallized this morning during an unscheduled closed-door caucus meeting in the old Senate chamber. According to multiple attendees who spoke on condition of anonymity, more than a dozen GOP senators, many of whom campaigned alongside Trump just months ago, delivered blistering rebukes of his refusal to step down or comply with the Supreme Court. Senator Susan Collins of Maine reportedly stood first, stating flatly, "The president's actions have crossed into dangerous territory that threatens the republic itself." She was followed by Mitt Romney, who read aloud portions of his own resignation letter from an earlier advisory role, calling the current standoff a deliberate assault on constitutional order. The betrayal cuts deepest from those once considered Trump's staunchest allies. Senator Josh Hawley, who famously raised a fist in solidarity on January 6th, remained conspicuously silent during the session, but later issued a 1S sentence statement. The rule of law must prevail, even when it is politically inconvenient. Lindsey Graham, long a vocal Trump defender, reportedly left the meeting early and has not returned calls from White House staff. Behind the scenes, party whips are scrambling to prevent a full public break. But the damage is done. Leaked audio snippets show heated exchanges where senators accuse Trump of gambling with the country's future for personal survival. Public loyalty has evaporated almost overnight. Social media timelines of Republican lawmakers are filled with carefully worded calls for respecting judicial authority rather than the familiar defenses of witch hunts or fake news. Several have already carnaled joint appearances with Trump surrogates, and fundraising emails that once featured his name now omit it entirely. The quiet exit is accelerating. 3 more House Republicans announced they will not seek re-election, citing the toxic environment created by the ongoing crisis. The political meaning is unmistakable. They see the writing on the wall and are positioning themselves for a post-Trump GOP, one that can hope to salvage seats in the rapidly approaching midterms. This internal fracture supercharges the legal and power cascade. With cabinet-level resignations leaving critical departments leaderless, acting officials are now forced to choose between loyalty to the president and fidelity to the Constitution. The Justice Department, operating under an interim leadership that emerged from career ranks, has formally notified the White House that contempt proceedings will commence within 48 hours unless compliance is demonstrated. A federal judge in D.C. this afternoon issued a show cause order directing Trump to appear personally or risk an arrest warrant, a move that legal scholars say is almost unprecedented against a sitting president. Possible outcomes now include not only contempt, but the potential activation of emergency removal protocols under obscure sections of federal code governing executive succession during incapacitation or refusal. House Speaker Mike Johnson, facing pressure from both flanks of his caucus, has scheduled an Emergency Rules Committee meeting to consider fast-tracking impeachment articles focused on obstruction and abuse of power. Even if the Senate conviction remains unlikely in the short term, say, mere introduction of articles would deepen the institutional isolation surrounding Trump. One move forces the next. The court's show cause order triggers mandatory reporting to Congress, which in turn obligates committee chairs to act, creating an unstoppable chain of accountability. Constitutional experts warned that if Trump attempts to fire acting officials en masse, it could trigger immediate 25th Amendment deliberations among whatever cabinet remnants remain. Though the math is razor-thin with so many positions vacant, behind-the-scenes maneuvering has reached fever pitch. Senior military officials at the Pentagon have reportedly briefed congressional leaders on continuity of government protocols, emphasizing that chain of command integrity must be preserved, regardless of political turmoil. The FBI is quietly increasing protective details around key defectors, anticipating possible threats from extremist elements still loyal to Trump. This coordinated speed across branches suggests a shared institutional conviction. The president's position is no longer tenable, and resistance is rapidly weakening as isolation takes hold. The current strategy phase is containment fused with isolation, containing the fallout to the executive branch while systematically cutting off Trump's access to levers of power. Damage-limiting efforts include emergency briefings to foreign ambassadors to reassure allies that core U.S. functions remain intact. The overarching objective is to prevent any dramatic escape attempt, whether legal, fleeing the country, or physical, fortifying the White House, while locking in defections through public commitments and private assurances of protection. As the crisis enters its second full day, the world is watching America with a mixture of alarm and disbelief. Stock markets in Europe and Asia have opened sharply lower, with the Dow futures indicating a potential 800-point drop at the New York Open. Currency traders are dumping the dollar in favor of safe havens like the Swiss franc and Japanese yen, while bond yields spike as investors price in political risk premiums not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. International headlines scream variations of the same question. Is American democracy imploding in real time? NATO headquarters in Brussels issued a rare public statement this afternoon, expressing deep concern over developments that could affect transatlantic security cooperation. Behind closed doors, European leaders are reportedly accelerating contingency planning for a scenario in which US executive authority remains contested for weeks or months. The United Kingdom's Foreign Office has quietly advised British nationals in Washington to avoid protest zones, while Canada's Prime Minister convened an emergency cabinet meeting to discuss border security implications if civil unrest escalates. Credibility damage is already severe. The US legal system, long held up as a global model, now faces scrutiny from authoritarian regimes eager to point out hypocrisy. China's state media has seized on the chaos with gleeful editorials declaring the so-called beacon of democracy has flickered out. Russia's foreign ministry issued a statement offering sympathy to the American people during this difficult period of internal strife. Even traditional allies are repositioning. France and Germany have delayed joint military exercises, citing uncertainty over US command reliability. The risk of diplomatic isolation is growing by the hour. Several Latin American governments have postponed high-level visits, while Middle Eastern partners quietly shift negotiations toward career diplomats rather than political appointees. Markets face the additional threat of shock if the standoff drags on. Analysts warned that prolonged uncertainty could trigger a credit rating downgrade for US sovereign debt. A move last seriously contemplated during the 2011 debt ceiling crisis. Inside the country, the power struggle has decisively shifted from politics to enforcement, from rhetoric to mechanism, from loyalty to pure survival. Trump's inner circle has shrunk to a handful of family members and ultra-loyalists who remain barricaded in the residence. Public defiance continues. A late-afternoon Truth Social barrage accused traitorous Renos and corrupt judges of staging a coup. But the posts garnered fewer reposts than usual, suggesting even his base is beginning to fracture under the weight of reality. Emergency filings flood the courts. Stay requests, emergency injunctions, motions to recuse justices. But lower courts are rejecting them at lightning speed, citing the urgency of the underlying Supreme Court mandate. Counter-orders have begun to appear. Trump directed acting department heads to disregard congressional subpoenas, but career civil servants are openly refusing, citing Hatch Act violations and personal liability. Global institutions are repositioning accordingly. The IMF has placed US economic forecasts under special review, while the UN Security Council is expected to hold informal consultations on the stability of the world's largest economy. Security repositioning is underway. US embassies in volatile regions are increasing guard forces, and Indo-Pacific allies are quietly strengthening bilateral ties with other regional powers as a hedge. The situation accelerates toward a narrow set of outcomes. Enforcement now appears inevitable, whether through contempt citations escalating to physical custody, congressional removal proceedings, or an eventual invocation of succession protocols, collapse remains a real possibility if loyalist elements attempt armed resistance or if federal agencies splinter along political lines. A historic confrontation looms as the final test of whether the system's guardrails can hold against sustained executive defiance. By nightfall on this second day, Washington feels like a city holding its breath. The White House remains lit, but strangely still. No marine sentries at routine posts, no motorcade departures, only the occasional silhouette moving behind bulletproof glass. Protesters number in the thousands now, split between those demanding Trump's immediate removal and a smaller, angrier contingent waving MAGA flags and chanting against deep state traders. Clashes have been minor so far, but police lines grow thicker with each passing hour. This is no longer a story about one person. It is a test of the system itself, whether centuries-old checks and balances can withstand a president who refuses to accept their verdict. The resignations, the mutiny, the legal cascade, the global alarm, all converge on a single question. Can the machinery of American democracy function when its chief executive declares himself exempt from its rules? Outcomes now narrow to three stark paths: enforcement, federal marshals, or U.S. marshals; service agents executing court orders, potentially entering the White House precincts under protection of the military if necessary; collapse, a breakdown of governance so severe that acting officials invoke emergency succession, triggering a chaotic transfer of power amid competing claims of legitimacy. Historic confrontation, a prolonged standoff, ending in impeachment conviction, 25th Amendment removal, or, most dangerously, military intervention to restore constitutional order. After this moment, nothing returns to normal. The precedent set will echo for generations, reshaping executive power, party loyalty, and public trust in institutions. Even if Trump ultimately relents or is removed, the scars will remain. A party fractured beyond easy repair, a judiciary under siege from both sides, an electorate further polarized, and allies abroad who will never again assume automatic U.S. stability. The situation is now irreversible and accelerating out of containment. Every hour that passes without resolution tightens the noose: more defections, sharper market reactions, louder global warnings, stronger institutional resolve. The machinery is in motion, and it does not stop for appeals, tweets, or defiance. History is being written tonight, not in grand speeches or dramatic showdowns on the steps of the Capitol, but in quiet resignations, whispered caucus conversations, and the steady turning of legal gears. The test is underway, and the system, bruised, strained, but still functioning, is answering.